Vienna, 1847. A city of soaring ambition, of elegant waltzes, of burgeoning scientific inquiry. But beneath the veneer of its grandeur, a silent, terrifying killer relentlessly stalked the maternity wards. A specific, unseen plague that stole young mothers in their most hopeful hours, leaving behind shattered families and echoing grief. This devastating affliction was known as childbed fever, and in the city's hospitals, it was claiming lives at an alarming, incomprehensible rate, a constant specter of death in a place meant for new beginnings. At the renowned Vienna General Hospital, the mortality rate within one particular maternity clinic was a staggering 10%. In some grim months, this figure climbed even higher, reaching terrifying peaks of 20% or more. Imagine the pervasive fear that gripped these women. You are a new mother, embarking on the profound journey of bringing new life into the world, only to find yourself consumed by an invisible, relentless enemy. The physicians, the very individuals dedicated to healing, were utterly baffled and powerless. They offered prayers, applied traditional poultices, and administered remedies that were utterly ineffective against this relentless onslaught. Into this climate of despair stepped Ignaz Semmelweis. A young, determined Hungarian physician, driven by an insatiable intellectual curiosity and a profound need to truly understand the root cause of this suffering. He arrived at the clinic, a place where profound hope often dissolved into utter despair. He witnessed the agonizing suffering firsthand. He felt the crushing weight of helplessness that permeated the ward. And with a keen, observant eye, he began to watch, to meticulously observe, and most importantly, to count. He meticulously noted a stark, undeniable difference between the two maternity clinics. The first clinic, which was attended by medical students who simultaneously performed autopsies on deceased patients, exhibited a dramatically higher death rate. In stark contrast, the second clinic, attended exclusively by midwives who did not engage in post-mortem examinations, had significantly lower mortality figures. The students, freshly departed from the cold, sterile environment of the dissection rooms, their hands perhaps still carrying the subtle traces of death, would proceed directly to examine the pregnant women, creating a chilling, unsettling connection. A chilling, almost unthinkable hypothesis began to coalesce in Semmelweis's sharp mind. Could it be that something invisible, something microscopic, something unknowingly carried on the very hands of the physicians, was the direct cause of this devastating mortality? A cadaverous poison, he theorized, a subtle particle transferred from the deceased to the living, vulnerable patients. It was a radical, almost heretical thought for the prevailing scientific and medical understanding of his era, a concept that defied the established doctrines. He proposed a solution so profoundly simple, so basic, that it was initially met with disbelief and outright ridicule by many of his peers: rigorous handwashing. He instituted a strict protocol, insisting that all doctors and medical students meticulously wash their hands with a potent chlorinated lime solution before examining any patient. This seemingly mundane act, this simple ablution, was about to prove itself as a powerful, life-saving intervention. In his clinic, the transformation was nothing short of miraculous. The death rate, once a terrifying constant, plummeted dramatically. It fell from the abysmal 10% to a mere 1%, and in some periods, it descended even lower, approaching zero. The childbed fever, that relentless scourge, was being effectively vanquished, defeated by the simple, combined power of soap, water, and a chlorinated solution. Semmelweis had discovered the vital key, a brilliant beacon of scientific light piercing through the overwhelming darkness of medical ignorance. Yet, his personal triumph was agonizingly short-lived. His hard-won victory met not with widespread acclaim, but with bitter scorn and outright rejection. The entrenched medical elite, men of considerable academic standing and steeped in centuries of tradition, simply refused to accept his revolutionary findings. The very idea that their own hands, the hands of educated, respected physicians, could be instruments of death was an unbearable insult to their professional identity and authority. It fundamentally challenged their worldview, their perceived infallibility. They dismissed him as eccentric, labeling his life-saving practice as the delusion of a madman, a dangerous departure from established medical doctrine. They openly mocked his meticulously documented methods, they ridiculed his intelligence, and they dismissed his compelling evidence with contempt. The nascent concept of invisible germs or microorganisms as disease vectors was utterly alien to their established understanding of pathology, which relied on concepts like imbalances of humors, miasmatic air, or even divine punishment. Semmelweis's simple, observable, and empirically proven truth was far too disruptive, too inconvenient to their deeply entrenched, comforting beliefs and the existing medical hierarchy. His professional colleagues in Vienna systematically ostracized him, his position at the hospital was terminated, and his vital work was actively suppressed. The very institution that should have been the first to champion his groundbreaking, life-saving discovery instead turned its back, actively working against him. He pleaded his case through letters, published his seminal findings in a desperate attempt to convince them, but his earnest voice was tragically drowned out by the overwhelming chorus of disbelief, professional jealousy, and indignant anger. The relentless pressure of constant rejection and professional isolation began to exact a devastating toll on Semmelweis. The arduous, unending battle against entrenched dogma and widespread ignorance chipped away at his once unwavering resolve. He became increasingly distressed, his communications more erratic and desperate as he struggled to make his life-saving message heard. The brilliant man who held the key to preventing countless deaths was slowly being broken by the very disease of disbelief he fought so fiercely against. He eventually returned to his native Hungary, hoping for a more receptive audience, but even there, his revolutionary ideas were met with deep-seated suspicion and outright resistance. The seeds of doubt and ridicule had been sown too effectively by his powerful Viennese detractors, poisoning the well of scientific discourse. Despite facing continued opposition and skepticism, he stubbornly continued to advocate for his simple, yet profound, practice of hand hygiene, his once bright spirit increasingly dimmed by years of exhausting struggle and unacknowledged genius. Tragically, in a twist of fate that remains one of history's most poignant ironies, Ignaz Semmelweis himself was eventually confined to a mental asylum. The man who dedicated his life to saving countless women from a deadly illness met his own end under circumstances that were themselves marked by profound isolation and misunderstanding. The exact details of his death remain debated by historians, but it is certain that his brilliant mind and passionate spirit were extinguished far too soon, a victim of the very prejudice he fought against. His groundbreaking discoveries, however, could not be permanently suppressed. The scientific world eventually caught up to his prescient insights. Brilliant minds like Louis Pasteur and Joseph Lister would later build upon Semmelweis's foundational work, meticulously developing and solidifying the principles of germ theory and antiseptic practices. They, armed with more advanced scientific tools and a slightly more open intellectual climate, would ultimately prove Semmelweis undeniably correct, validating his radical ideas decades after his death. It took years, decades even, for the medical establishment to fully embrace Semmelweis's simple yet revolutionary concept. The resistance he faced was not just scientific, it was deeply personal, rooted in ego, tradition, and a profound unwillingness to confront an uncomfortable truth. The cost of this resistance was immense, measured in the countless lives unnecessarily lost to childbed fever between his discovery and its eventual acceptance. His story serves as a stark, enduring reminder of how powerfully entrenched beliefs can obstruct progress. The principles of hygiene and sanitation that we now take for granted, the basic act of washing our hands before surgery or childbirth, are direct descendants of Semmelweis's lonely struggle. It's a practice so ingrained in modern medicine that its origins are often forgotten. Yet, it represents a monumental victory, hard-won against ignorance and professional pride, a victory that continues to save millions of lives every single year across the globe. Consider the sheer audacity of his claim in the mid-19th century. Germ theory, as we understand it today, was virtually non-existent. Disease was attributed to miasmas, imbalances in bodily humors, or even moral failings. The idea that tiny, invisible particles, transferred through touch, could cause such widespread death was beyond the comprehension and acceptance of most learned physicians. His theory was not just unproven by their standards, it was fundamentally antithetical to everything they believed about the nature of illness. Semmelweis meticulously documented his observations. He recorded patient histories, compared mortality rates, and noted every variable he could. His method was rooted in empirical evidence, a cornerstone of the scientific method. He saw the correlation between the autopsy room and the death rate and pursued the logical conclusion, however unpopular. His data was undeniable, yet it was his interpretation, his radical solution, that met such fierce resistance. The medical community of the time was highly hierarchical. Authority was concentrated in the hands of a few senior figures, and challenging their established wisdom was seen as an act of insubordination. Semmelweis, a younger physician, was stepping far outside his perceived role. His persistence in advocating for handwashing was not just a scientific debate, it was a direct confrontation with the established power structure and the egos of influential men. His published work, The Etiology, Concept, and Prophylaxis of Childbed Fever, though now considered a seminal text, was largely ignored or actively attacked upon its release in 1861. Reviewers dismissed it outright, often resorting to personal insults rather than engaging with his data. The book was a testament to his years of painstaking research and his desperate plea for reason, but it failed to penetrate the wall of skepticism and hostility he faced. The irony of his fate is profound. While Semmelweis battled the invisible enemy of childbed fever and the equally formidable enemy of medical dogma, he was himself becoming increasingly unwell, perhaps from stress, perhaps from exposure to the very diseases he fought. His final years in the asylum were a stark contrast to the brilliance he displayed earlier, a tragic end for a man whose insights were so desperately needed, yet so tragically misunderstood and rejected in his own time. It was not until the late 19th century, with the work of Pasteur and Lister, that the concept of germ transmission through physical contact gained widespread acceptance. Their experiments, using more advanced scientific methods and benefiting from a slightly more receptive scientific climate, provided the definitive proof that Semmelweis had intuitively grasped decades earlier. His name, once reviled, began to be recognized as a pioneer. The story of Ignaz Semmelweis is more than just a historical anecdote, it is a powerful, cautionary tale about the nature of scientific progress and the human tendency towards resistance. It illustrates how deeply ingrained beliefs, even when demonstrably false, can impede the acceptance of life-saving truths. It underscores the courage it takes to challenge the status quo, even when facing overwhelming opposition. His legacy is not just in the sterile instruments and clean wards of modern hospitals. It's in every parent who holds their healthy newborn, every life saved from infection, every medical professional who instinctively washes their hands. It's a legacy written not in stone, but in the continued, silent triumph of life over death, a testament to one man's unwavering pursuit of truth against all odds. The resistance Semmelweis faced wasn't simply about professional jealousy or stubbornness, it tapped into a deeper, more primal fear of the unknown and a discomfort with self-blame. To admit that physicians themselves were the vector of disease was to confront a horrifying possibility, one that shook the very foundations of their identity as healers. This psychological barrier proved as formidable as any scientific objection. His dedication to observation and data collection was exceptional for his time. While others relied on tradition and anecdotal evidence, Semmelweis rigorously quantified outcomes. He understood that true scientific advancement required empirical proof, a commitment to facts over dogma. This methodical approach, unfortunately, wasn't enough to overcome the entrenched biases of his contemporaries. The story of childbed fever in Vienna is a stark illustration of the scientific process in action, albeit a tragically delayed one. It shows that discovery is not always linear, and acceptance is not always immediate. The path from a radical idea to established practice can be fraught with resistance, requiring not only intellectual rigor but also immense perseverance. Semmelweis's insistence on handwashing was not just a medical intervention, it was a philosophical stance. It argued for accountability, for a direct link between action and consequence in the healing arts. It challenged the passive acceptance of death as an inevitable fate, proposing instead that human action, even simple hygiene, held immense power to alter outcomes. The tragedy of Semmelweis lies in the fact that his life was cut short before he could witness the full impact of his work. He died in 1865, unaware that within a few short years, the principles he championed would become cornerstones of modern medicine. His story is a profound reminder that the pursuit of knowledge and the fight for truth can be a lonely, arduous journey, often unrecognized in its own time. Today, Ignaz Semmelweis is celebrated as a hero of medicine. His name is synonymous with hygiene and preventative care. But his journey from ostracized doctor to medical saint was long and painful. It took the passage of time, the validation of other scientists, and the undeniable evidence of lives saved to finally cement his place in history. His story compels us to question resistance to new ideas, especially when those ideas promise to alleviate suffering. His name isn't on a grand monument in Vienna, but his legacy is in every life saved by simple hygiene. It took years of sifting through forgotten medical records and academic disputes to piece together his story. If his fight for truth moved you, a like and a subscribe are what allow us to uncover the next forgotten fight.